and spread awareness among general public about the history of Indian coins and heritage. Um, Besides writing a number of papers on diverse themes relating to the ancient Indian coins, Dr. Jha has authored two books. One, which is in Hindi, Bhartiya Sikke, Ek Aitihasik Parichay, which was published in 2003. And then he co-edited with his colleague Studies in the Coinage of the Western Kshatrapas, that was published in 1994. Dr. Jha is also the editor of the Numismatic Digest, which is a research journal totally dedicated to the study of Indian coins and heritage. We are very pleased to have you, Dr. Jha, with us today. And with this very brief introduction, I will request you to begin your presentation. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. Well, you had a very good session on epigraphy in the morning. Now we come down to coins, and I must start with a kind of statutory warning that a lecture on coins can sometimes act as a lullaby. And so please don't fall asleep, although it's a short lecture, only of 1 hour. And another thing that that I would like to mention at the very outset is that I believe all the teachers are not familiar with the subject, although some of them may be very knowledgeable. So I would rather stick to the basics of the subject. So those who are familiar with this subject, please don't feel irritated, because you may be knowing the things that I talk about, but it's for the benefit of all, so please bear with me. Well, I would like to begin with a question. Why study coins for knowing our history? So, were the coins meant to tell history? The answer is a clear no. Because coins, like today's currency, today's coins and currency notes, even in earlier times, they were actually money. They were means of payment. They were meant to facilitate trade and transactions, and were primarily economic objects. So why, as students of history, do we, particularly ancient Indian history, we say what we need to study coins because it's a vital source for knowing our history? Why? The answer is very simple, and I think most of you who are students of history, who are teaching history, you're familiar with it. Because in India, unlike the Western, Greco-Roman Western world, we did not have a tradition of writing history till a very late period. We do not have written history available. So there is no connected account available to us. There are lots of literature, but they're mostly religious literature. Of course, many of them do contain certain historical information, but then you have to sift them out. They are in a garb version. You have to collect those information and then see in the light of other available material evidence whether it's being corroborated or not. So for knowing our history, we have to fall back upon the material evidence in the form of coins, epigraphs, archaeological objects that have come down to us. Now, the advantage of coins is that, firstly, they were contemporary objects. So that way, they constitute an important component of the material evidence for the early history of India. since they were made of metals and very often made in very large numbers, they have survived down to us. In fact, much more than other material evidence, and often in very large numbers. For many regions and periods of ancient Indian history, if you see the history, the coins are sometimes the solitary source of information available. And herein lies its importance, because had the coins not been there, then we would have remained in complete dark about those periods of Indian history. So this is primarily the reason that coins, even though they were not meant to act as history tellers to us, or they were not meant to reveal history to us, they were actually monies in respective periods. But they assumed the role of history tellers for us. And but I would like to point out a very basic limitation of using coins as an evidence for understanding our history. You see, the coins are small metal objects containing very kind of limited information. They have either some symbols, designs, motifs on them, and sometimes a short inscription written on them. Now, they do provide certain information, but it's a very small information, and it stands absolutely nowhere in comparison to the information that is available from a, say, written text or chronicle. Like for medieval period, when written texts and chronicles become available in large numbers, although the coins that were issued in medieval period, they are much more informative than, say, the coins that were issued in early times, ancient times. But still, they're not made use of so much as compared to the ancient times, because a connected account is available in the form of written books for the medieval period. But we do not have that prerogative, that advantage for the ancient times. And so whatever little information that is provided by the coins, we have to kind of like as if we are making a garland, sewing a garland. So we have to sew those tiny information, tiny available from coins into a form of connected account. But naturally, there are many gaps in such accounts. And many a times it so happens that what we formulate today is disproven tomorrow because some new evidence come to light. So very often there is enough scope for further research. So this is the basic limitation of the coins. Now, before, since I would not be going in a kind of chronological order or to highlight the importance of coins, I would only touch upon, because the time is very limited, so I would only touch upon certain aspects and certain instances to show how coins have helped us for understanding the different aspects of Indian history. But before I do that, I know some of you may not be familiar with this subject, so I would just briefly, very briefly, give you a brief overview of early Indian coinage. This will actually help you in understanding the Indian coins in a better perspective. Now, many of you may be aware that the coinage in India commenced sometime in 6th, 5th century BCE. Of course, there are different proponents of these dates, but 5th century, 6th century BCE is the most kind of accepted date. Now, the earliest coins were made of silver, and they were made by a technique which we call punching technique. And that is why these coins are called silver punch marked coins. And these are the earliest coins. Punching means that suppose 2-3 symbols are to go on the coins. For stamping those symbols, 3 different punches would be made, and then it would be placed on the metal and hammered onto it, so that those symbols come out in positive. So it's not a single big composite die, but small dies, which we call punch. Now, the initial coins that were issued in India between 6th, 5th to about 3rd, 2nd century BCE are what I prefer to call anonymous. Anonymous because these coins have only symbols punched on them. There is no written inscription, no written letters on them. So we cannot ascribe these coins to particular dynasties or particular rulers with any amount of certainty. Of course, with the help of other evidence like where they have been found and then correlating it with certain literary evidence, they have been attributed to certain states. But beyond that, it's not possible to attribute them to specific rulers. Now, these punchmark coins, initially they are localized. So there are different types found in different areas. I'll show you some image in a short while, so that you have an idea of what they look like. And subsequently, particularly from 4th century BC onwards, that is in the time of Nandas and Mauryas, many of these states were subsumed into the Magadhan Mauryan Empire. And then we have a kind of uniform kind of silver punch mark coins, which are found almost all over the Indian subcontinent. So you have these are called imperial or universal type of silver punch mark coins. And there is no doubt in my mind that it could have been issued only by an imperial power, although sometimes some people say that maybe trade guilds or corporations were issuing them. But in my view, it's not possible. Anyway, so this anonymous phase continues till 3rd, 2nd century BC. And even subsequently, even in the post-Ashokan period, the punchmark coins continue. But from 2nd century BC onwards, again, we begin to find local patterns in those coins, and probably some of the local states or local chieftaincies who presumed independence, taking advantage of the weakening of the Mauryan Empire, issued them. And they are found in different areas, Vidarbha, Central India, even in South. The Pandyas issued a silver punchmark coin. And then in 2nd century BC, we begin to find copper punchmark coins of different types also. This is roughly showing the existence or the provenance distribution of the early local types of punchmark coins that were issued from 6th, 5th century BC onwards till sometimes. I mean, you have to remember that all these so-called local punchmark coins, or as sometimes they're called Janapad punchmark coins, all of them did not begin at the same time. Some of them are earlier and some are actually quite late, like those from Saurashtra, which are attributed to Saurashtra Janpad. Some of them may be even post-Mauryan. Similarly, those at Sursain or found in Central India, they are slightly later than, say, those of Kashi, Magadh, or Gandhar. So the point to remember is that all of them did not start at the same time. These are some of the types of local punchmark coins. Like one at the top is attributed to the Vajis because they are found from eastern UP and Nepal border. One on the right is attributed to Kashi area because they are found from that area. Then the in the second row, left side, first coin, it is attributed to the Koshalas. On the right side, it is attributed to the Magadh, and so on and so forth. So there are different types. And if you see these coins, you will find that some of them have either one punch or two punches, sometimes one major punch and smaller punches around it. Sometimes they have a set of 4 punches, and 2 punches are repeated. But that's not very material here. What I would like you to see is that if you see the symbol, you see an area around it. That is the mark left by the punch. And where they say there are more than one punches, so every symbol will have the this infused mark left by the punch. And that is how we identify the technique that this coin is made by punching. Now, this is the map showing the provenance of the so-called imperial or universal types of punchmark coins. And as you can see, it's almost all over the Indian subcontinent. And this was a very popular currency, and it was a very, very voluminous currency. It has been found in very large numbers. And you should remember that the numbers that we see today in the form of, say, published codes or published articles, lists, they are a very municipal part of the coins that have been that would have been issued, because it's not that they are being found only today. They must have been found in 3rd century AD also, 8th century AD also, because they were buried there and people would have accident. Sorry.
No, yes, sir. Go on, sir.
Yeah. So people would have found them even in earlier times. So, and as it is, these were very popular coins, and even after they ceased to be issued, they continued in circulation. Because, as you will see in the history of Indian coinage, in once the Mauryan punchmark coins stopped being issued, only in the northwest there was a tradition of silver coinage in the subsequent period till 1st century AD. And then in the north, we do not find any silver coinage. So at many places, these silver coins may have continued in circulation even in subsequent times. And at times in historical excavations, they have been found in layers datable to even 6th, 7th century AD. And even in literature, sometimes they're called Puran. So they were old coins. So it did not happen that once a dynasty issuing a particular type disappeared, their coinages were completely withdrawn from circulation because it was not economically or financially feasible to withdraw all those coins from circulation. So they continued to circulate. So of course, their numbers would dwindle over a period of time. So these are the some of the types. I mean, they've been distinguished into 600, 700 varieties on the basis of symbols. But the important feature of these coins is that two symbols, one is a sun symbol and the other is a symbol with 6 arms. So 6 arm symbol, they continue almost, they're present throughout the history of these imperial benchmark coins, and other 3 symbols change on the basis of which and on the basis of the plans of the coin. They've been distinguished, classified into several series. Anyway, that's not very material here. So these continue for a long time. Then in the Mauryan period, that is from 4th, 3rd century BC onwards, coins of copper were also introduced, and they were made by a different technique, that is casting technique. Casting technique is the technique where you use molds, clay molds with the designs of the coin, and then those molds are baked and fired, and then you melt down the metal and pour into it. And these coins, like the silver punchmark coins, these coins are also uninscribed, which means nothing is written on them. They have only symbols on them. But these were the coins that, perhaps from the Mauryan period onwards, acted as the common man's currency. Because silver is a precious metal. So you would not expect that the common people in their day-to-day lives, if only silver coins are there, it means that in the bigger trade and transactions, the use of money is taking place. But in their day-to-day lives economy, they're probably using the barter system. But once the copper coins, small copper coins are introduced, it means that even petty transactions, small value transactions are monetized. That is, the use of money is taking place. And probably these uninscribed cast coins serve that purpose. Nowadays, many a times, these coins are labeled Sunga issues, which is not entirely correct. Because if you see the archaeological excavations, wherever silver punchmark coins, imperial silver punchmark coins have been found, and cast coins have been found, they have been either found together, and sometimes even cast coins precede the occurrence of imperial punchmark coins. So they were definitely issued in the from the Mauryan period onwards. And then in the post-Mauryan period, they continued, and subsequently from 2nd century BC onwards, they were replaced by local types at different places in Vidarbha, Deccan, Andhra, Koshambi. There are many places where local types of cast coins are found. Another thing that uh, you should remember about the casting technique is that uh, it was never used for making any precious metal currency coins. Only copper coins were made by this technique. And the last evidence of the use of this technique that we find is in 3rd, 4th, or 5th century CE, when those Kushan imitation coins from Eastern India, which are popularly called as Puri Kushans, were made. Those were perhaps the last coins made by casting technique. The reason it was not used for making the precious metal currency coins officially was that casting was the most favored technique for the counterfeiters, forgers. For forgery, this is the easiest technique. Suppose there is a silver coin made by, say, die striking technique or punching technique. You press it on clay, make a mold, and then make a copper coin of the same type and apply some silver, silver washing or silver plating over there. So your manufacturing costs are uh, negligible in comparison to the value of the official coin. And if you are able to pass it on as a genuine coin, then the counterfeiter's purpose is served. But if the official coins were made by casting technique in precious metal and those were forged by the same technique, they would have been impossible to distinguish. So casting was never used officially for making precious metal currency. Anyway, that was just incidental. These are in the top row that you see the coins. These are the coins types, rectangular form, elephant with a variety of symbols. And these symbols are very common symbols on ancient Indian coins. Some of them are found actually borrowed from the silver punchmark coins. And over a period of time, they became so popular that in different areas, the different issuing authorities adopted these symbols. I personally feel that since many of these symbols on the early punchmark coins were used over a long period of time, they sort of became a kind of identification mark for the metal object called coin. So if you have to issue a coin, you would be issuing one of these symbols like tree or hill or animal like elephant, bull, etc., or triangle-headed standard, and so on and so forth. Anyway, so these are the types which continued from Mauryan types. And then at the bottom, you see some of the local types of cast coins. So this was the first phase, anonymous phase, where coins did not have any inscription. This changes in the middle of the 3rd century BCE, when inscriptions begin to happen. Now, there are two categories of coins. One is the coin issued by rulers of foreign origin, like the Greeks. So, around middle of the 3rd century BCE, not exactly in the Indian subcontinent, but to the north of it, in the province called Bactria, or the region called Bactria, began the series of coins which were made by die striking technique. And these were issued by Greek rulers who were ruling there on behalf of the Seleucid rulers. The Seleucid rulers were the successors of Seleucus, and Seleucus Nicator as General of Alexander. But the Seleucid rulers themselves was headquartered in Syria, West Asia. So on behalf of those Seleucid rulers, the Bactria was under them. The other areas were lost to the Mauryas. These Greek rulers were ruling, and then in middle of the 3rd century BC, the Greek governor revolted against his Seleucid master and started issuing his own coins. And these are beautiful coins. And in Bactria, they issued coins in gold as well, although silver is the more common metal for the present metal currency, and copper coins were issued. And the typology was based on the design or the typology established by Alexander. So you have the ruler's portrait or bust on one side and a Greek divine figure on the other side. And there is an inscription with the help of which you can identify the ruler. So this happens, and then around the beginning of 2nd century BC, that is 190, 180 BC, they crossed over the Hindu Kush mountain range, which separated the Indian subcontinent from Bactria. And so south of Hindu Kush mountain range was the traditional Jambu Dweep or Indian subcontinent, and started expanding their territories into the northwestern part of India. Now here they issued a long series of silver and copper coins, and now, of course, their weight standard changed from the one that they used in Bactria. Now these rulers are called IndoGreeks. Now in the classical sources, 5 or 6 of these rulers are mentioned, whereas from coins we know of 40 odd rulers. So you can very well imagine that had their coins not been there, you would have remained in complete dark about even their political history. Now these Greeks, their rule was, from 2nd century BC and 1st century BC, there were other invasions like those of Indo-Scythians, whom we call Sakas in India, or Indo-Parthians from West Asia, whom we call Pahlawas. And they followed more or less the same typology, and they continued till 1st century CE in northwestern part of the subcontinent. But as far as indigenous, these are some of the, like in the top row, it's a coin of Diodotus, who was the first Bactrian Greek ruler. And there is a Greek inscription which says Basilius Diodotau, which means of King Diodot. This coin is of King Diodot. Similarly, the second one is of Euthydemus, another ruler. The one on left at the bottom is interesting. This is of Demetrius first, and he was perhaps the first ruler to cross the Hindu Kush mountain range and started expanding their territories into India. And sometimes these coins, when you speak to them, they provide interesting nuggets of information, although it's too well known, but I would like to mention it. You can see the headdress that he's using, the cap that he's wearing. It's actually an elephant head being used as a headdress. And some other Indo-Greek rulers have used this kind of headdress. And it suggested that perhaps these rulers encountered elephant for the first time when they came to this part of the world. Earlier, they were not acquainted with this animal, and they perhaps took a fancy to this animal. And some of the rulers have used their headdress like this. One on the right are the typical Indo-Greek currency, and these are of Menander, one of the most famous Indo-Greek rulers, and they are bilingual or biscriptal. So they have the typology more or less remains the same, but they have inscriptions written in two scripts. So on the obverse, it is in Greek script and Greek language, Vasilia Soteros Menendrau, and on the reverse, it is written in Kharoshthi script, which was used in the northwest part of the subcontinent, and the language is Prakrit. The meaning of the inscription remains the same. So Maharajas Prataras Mindrasa. The meaning is the same. So this is some of the Greek and Prakrit Greek and Indo-Greek coins. Now, indigenously also we find that in the post-Mauryan, particularly after Ashoka, the Mauryan Empire started weakening, and particularly in 2nd century BC, many small states and chiefdoms, they re-emerge or emerge on the political scene in North and Central India. Now, in some of these states were there even earlier, like Panchal, Koshal, Vat, etc. But their political existence in this period is revealed mostly by the coins issued by them. And there are large variety, large number of types of these coins issued by these rulers, which they've been called by different names in different books. So you will find tribal coins, local coins, early indigenous coins, Janapad coins, monarchical, republican, city-state. They're different names, but they're mostly post-Mauryan. And the one basic characteristic of these coins is that they're localized in different areas. So one particular type would be found only in specific areas, not beyond. The second characteristic is that except for very few series of so-called tribal or republican coins in the hilly regions of North India, most of these coins were issued in cheaper metals, baser metals, like the copper and bronzes of different types. While some of them were produced by the earlier techniques of punching and casting, now even for indigenous coins, the most popular technique, that is die striking, was introduced. Die striking means there are two composite dies. One, because as you're aware that coins have usually two sides, heads and tails, we normally call them. In the numismatics, they are called obverse and reverse. So the front side and the back side. So there was a die where the details of the designs were engraved in negative, and it was fixed in an anvil for the obverse side, on top of which the blank metal piece was kept. And over that, another die, which was called punch or hammer die for the reverse backside of the coin, was placed. And then from the top, it was hammered. So when it was hammered, the metal of the coin blank went into those engraved portions of the dies and came out in relief. So this was the major technique that was used from 3rd century BC onwards. And even today, the same technique continues. The only thing is that earlier everything was manual. Now everything is automated and the machine struck. And the most important thing is that now many of these coins bear inscriptions. Inscriptions written in Brahmi script, sometimes Brahmi and Kharoshthi as well in the northwestern part, which were influenced by the Greeks. And there are some coins where the style of writing of the Brahmi inscriptions, although they're not very well published and they get to be published, they're very, very early. They're almost akin to the modern forms of those Brahmi letters. As many of you must be aware that Brahmi continued for a very long time, from the time of Ashoka till late 9th century when it develops into Nagari. And so over a period of time, different changes took place in the form of the writing of letters. And although, and the study of those styles is for paleography. So some paleography, although is not very safe mode of dating, but sometimes it does provide certain help because there are certain key letters which, if you see a particular type, you can identify that this is early, this is somewhat late, maybe Kushan period or Gupta period, and so on and so forth. Anyway, I would not dwell on that. So, as you can see on the first coin, is a local coin from Central India, but the paleography is very, very early. So the inscriptions on these coins are very short. They just give the name of a ruler. Like on the first, it says Shivgutta Shah. That is, this coin is of Shivgutta. The language is generally is Prakrit, not Sanskrit. Sanskrit began to be used in a regular basis only from the Gupta period onwards. Prior to that, it's Prakrit. Although occasionally you do find Sanskritized legend or hybrid of Sanskrit and Prakrit on some coins, but it's mostly Prakrit, which was the language of the common people. So it's just the name of a ruler, or there is another category which we called civic issues or city issues, which were issued in the name of the city. So one at the bottom left, it gives, there is a inscription situated in the center, which reads Erikacham. Now, Erikach was a city which is in the present Jhansi district of Uttar Pradesh. It was an urban center, and where these coins were made. Then the two coins on the bottom side of the right, they are the so-called tribal or republican coins. Just to give you an example, these so-called tribal or republican coins were issued in the hilly regions, and only these two states, Vimaki and Kuninda, they issued silver coins in this period in somewhat greater number. In fact, Kuninda's silver coins are prolific. Silver coins of some other tribes are also known, like Kodumbaras or Yodhayas, but they were perhaps ceremonial issues the majority of their coins were in base metal, which is the characteristic of this period. So your introduction of the die striking technique and introduction of written letters. So now coins become definitely attributable. You can identify the name on the basis of the provenance. You can attribute them to certain states and so on. This is the basic feature of this period. Now, if we move slightly downwards into Central India and Deccan, the same type of phenomenon is noticed. We find smaller states and who are issuing their coins, and again in Madhya Pradesh area, Tripoli, Vidisha area, there are many local states, names of local rulers are found. Then if you come down to Deccan in Vidarbha, we find that before the Satvahans emerged as a major power in 1st century BCE, there are Mitra and Datta rulers. Similarly, if you go to Kotalingala in Andhra Pradesh, Karimnagar district, we find that before the Satvahans, there are Bhadra rulers, there are Gopa rulers, and so on and so forth. There are many sites where such pre-Satavahan coins are found in Deccan and South. Now, again, most of these coins are in copper, lead, and different types of alloys of copper, bronze, brass, and other types of bronzes also. And silver coins in this area were issued by the Satvahans, but at a slightly later date, later period of their history, from 2nd century BC onwards, 2nd century CE onwards. And then the Satvahans continued they emerged as a major power, and they issued a variety of coin types for different regions under their control. So for different regions, there were specific types. And then once they declined in 3rd century BC, they were followed by the Ikshvakus, Kadambas, etc. in different regions. So these are some of the pre-Satavahan coins and Satavahan coins. In the first row that you see, there is a particular type which is from Tripoli in central India. Then the second one is from Vidarbha area. The third one in the top row is of Chamuk from Kotlingala area. And then at the bottom, there are a few types showing the Satavahan currency from Vidarbha, from Nevasa, Paitan area. And then one at the bottom was a kind of slightly universal currency of the Satavahan, which was found throughout their empire. Most of them have inscriptions in Brahmi written in Prakrit language. These are again some of the pre-Satavahan coins. One from Tripuri, the one in the top row is of Gambhadra from Vidarbha. Then the third in the top row is actually a coin of Mitra ruler, Surya Mitra, whose coin was counter-struck by the Satvahans. Counter-striking, I'll explain a little later. Then at the bottom, there is these Sevak coins. Then this is a coin of King Bigr from, again, Vidarbha or Marathwada area. And Swami Gop from Kutlingala area. This is, you should remember, these are just only a very limited few tribes and few representing a few sites. There are many, many others where such kind of phenomenon is noticed. Now, if we move to Western India, not exactly in the post-modern period, but from first century CE, there is a group of rulers ruling there who are popularly known as Western Kshatriya rulers. And there were several families in this rulers, and the first family was Chahrat ruler. And in the Chahrat family, a ruler called Nahapan, who was perhaps the third or fourth ruler of that family, started a silver currency, small silver coin, which was actually modeled on the Indo-Greek silver gram coin of about 2.3, 2.4 grams. So he started, introduced a silver currency, and then this silver currency had a bust of the king on one side, around which there was an inscription. Then on the reverse, dynastic symbols were there, and another inscription. But this set in motion a particular typology in the region, which was followed by many succeeding dynasties. The other family of the Western Kshatriya rulers, then when the Guptas occupy Western India, they continued the same type. The Traikutakas issue coins in that type. The Satvahans, when they came in contact with the Western Kshatriyas, they introduced their own silver coin type of the same weight, and the basic typology with their own distinctive portraits, the Kalachuris, and then even subsequently, I mean, the Rashtrakutas, other rulers of Gujarat, they continued the portrait type for a very long time. So in this period, Western India was the only region which had a continuous tradition of silver coinage. There were coins in other metals as well, but silver was the most kind of continued coinage and most prolific in this region. Yeah, this is the first is a coin of, this is a dram coin of Apollodotus II, whose coins are found in Gujarat and sometimes found together with those of Nahapan. He is placed somewhere in 80 to 60 BC. And if you see the accounts of Periplos, it mentions that coins of Menander and Apollodotus are still current at Darigasa. That is, they were coming there and they've been found there. The second one is that of Nahapan. So obverse, there is a Greek inscription which very often is corrupted. But on the reverse, he uses the Chahrat emblems of thunderbolt and arrow. And there are two short inscriptions, one written in Brahmi and one written in Kharoshthi. So it starts at about 12 o'clock. The Brahmi inscription reads Ragyo Chahratas Nahapanas. Chahrat is the family name. And the same inscription in Kharoshthi, Rayo Chahratasa Nahapanasa, is there. The third coin that you see in the top is the coin of Nahapan, the same as the middle one, but which most of you must be familiar with. He was defeated finally by the Satvahan ruler Gautamiputra Satkarni. And on the top of the portrait, a three-picked hill symbol is overstruck, And on the reverse, another symbol, a cross with 4 balls at 4 ends, which is popularly known as Ujjain symbol, is overstruck. This overstriking is a very important tool in the numismatic methodology, which I'll show you some instances a little later. Then at the bottom, this is a coin of Chashtan, who was the first ruler of the next family of Western Kshatrap rulers, Chahrat. And his coins were very similar to Nahapan. And in fact, some coins have been reported where Chashtan has overstruck Nahapan's coins also. And now it is believed that it was Chashtan's regnal reckoning, which was followed by his successors, the other rulers who ruled for next 300 years, that developed into the Shak era. So he perhaps commenced his rule in 78 AD. And the last one, that is on the bottom line, he's a great grandson of Chashtan. There's a coin of Rudrasimha first. From his time onwards, an important feature was introduced on the coins, that is writing dates in Brahmi numerals behind the head. And these are small coins having a diameter of about 15 mm, 16 mm at the max. So if you put a scale and draw a line, you'll see the actual size of the coin. These are very small silver coins weighing about 2 to 2.2 grams. But these were an extremely prolific currency. And if you see the inscription written in that small space, the Brahmi inscription on the reverse consists of about 25-30 letters. So it reads Ragyo Mahachatrapas, Ragyo Mahachatrapas, Rudra Damnaputras, Ragyo Mahachatrapas, Rudrasihasa. So, which means that this is a coin of King Mahachatrap Rudrasimha, who is the son of King Mahachatrap Rudradaman. Now, this format of inscription became the usual feature from this period onwards, from the time of Rudradaman onwards. And when you arrange the coins of all the rulers, you get the entire political genealogy. And that is how the inscription, history of these Western Kshatrap rulers have been reconstructed. And then this ruler, Rudrasimha, from year 100, although the regnal reckoning is not mentioned, the era is not mentioned, but now it is generally accepted that this is in Shak era. So if it is like on this particular coin, it is 103 written, which means that this coin would have been issued in 181 AD. Now the last date on the coins of a ruler of this family is the year 337, that is year 415 AD, which is in the time of Kumargupta. So till then, they continued to issue coins in Western India. And so this was about Western India. And then these are some of the other portrait type or bust type silver currency that were influenced. One of the top are of Satvahans. Of course, their typology is slightly different, but their busts are quite distinctive. But they follow the same typology. Then middle row, there's a coin of, the first coin is of Chandragupta second, then one in the center placed vertically, is a coin of Kumargupta, and the third in the second row is of the usual coins of Guptas have a Garud standing frontally on the reverse. Of course, it has a bust facing right. Then the third one is a bull seated, that is a coin of Skandgupta, and that was followed by the Krishnaraj Kalachuri, whose coins are shown in the third row. So these are some of the types that were issued in the Western India. Now, till now, no gold coins were issued on a regular basis in India. You are known of Menander, that those were kind of very sporadic. It's the Kushans who established a big empire in 2nd century CE. That the credit of issuing the first regular currency in gold goes to. And the first ruler who started a gold currency on a regular basis was Bhimakatphises. And then it was followed by Kanishk, Bhugesh, Vasudev first. Other rulers, Kanishk second, Vashes, Kanishk third, Bhugesh second, so forth. So, alongside, they issued an extensive currency in copper. They follow more or less the same typology. And then their gold coins were followed by the Guptas in 4th century B. And initially, they were based on the Kushan typology only. Later on, some other elements, Indian elements, were added to it. But they followed the same metrology, that is the weight of the coins, etc. Yeah, the top one is one of the types of Bhimakatphises. So essentially, it shows king in different postures on the obverse, and there is a Greek inscription written in Greek script, and on the reverse, like on Bhimakatphises coin, you find Shiva standing with bull or Shiv alone, and sometimes there is a Kharoshti inscription, sometimes there are no inscriptions. From Kanishka's time onwards, the inscription, the Kharoshti was removed from the reverse, and Kanishka issued most of his coins in the same typology, that is king standing offering at a fire altar with his extended right hand and holding a trident in his, or spear in his left hand, raised left hand. And the language of the inscription was changed from Greek to so-called Bactrian. So earlier it was Basilion. Now it was changed to Shao Nano Shao Kanishki Kushan. Meaning remained the same. King, the great king, Kanishki Kushan. And on the reverse, you find a number of deities depicted. Most of them are Zoroastrian deities, Iranian deities, like Nero, Mao. So there are some Greek deities as well, and there are some Indian deities like Shiva, Buddha, etc. The Kushans follow the same typology initially. So king is shown standing. Again, there is a fire altar. But there are other elements like Garud standard is added to it. The inscription is now written in Brahmi script. And along the margin, Sanskrit inscription is added. Initially, on the reverse, they use the deity which was very popular on later Kushan coins, that is seated or Dokcho, who is an Iranian goddess of prosperity, and she holds a pot of cornucopia. Later on, she is replaced by Lakshmi seated on lotus, holding a lotus stalk in her hand. So this essentially is the, I would not go beyond because the time is limited. So I would confine myself till Gupta period. Now, coming to the main aspect, how exactly do we use to elicit information from coins? The symbols and the short inscriptions, which makes the typology become our main tool for understanding a typology. But then we have to see uh, other related issues like typological continuation, succession, which particular, because you see, for most of uh, ancient times, we do not have anything available regarding the dates, chronology, etc. Of course, there may be some people who would now decry it, that mostly relates to the political history, or but even for understanding other kinds of formations, you have to first know your data. So that uh, uh, becomes an important part of numismatic study. You have to first reconstruct the data, and then you can do other kinds of analysis. So anyway, uh, so typology is one element. Then fabric. Fabric is the general appearance of the coin, which is given to it by size, dimensions, etc. And the third is physical analysis, metal or metal compositions, weight and denominations, and then technique becomes very important, because suppose you find a coin, silver coin, in archaeological excavation, and you see that it was perhaps made by punching technique. There are certain traces available, although the details are not very clear. So you can at least make a guess that this would not have been made beyond 1st century BCE. It may not help you in dating the layers, because that would again then depend on the associated finds. Because uh, the only thing is that if a particular coin is found in a, say, stratified layer, uh, the one definite thing is that the layer of date cannot be before the issue of that issuing date of that coin. Beyond that, you have to see other evidence for formally dating or formally using it for dating the stratigraphy. So technique becomes an important tool for uh, our numismatic methodology. Now, I would give you certain, I mean, they're just random, just to show how coins tell us history or how coins talk. Actually, you have to coax them. You have to make them talk to you. Now, this is an interesting coin. Uh, you see, when the Greeks started issuing coins in Bactria, the primary type is a king's portrait on one side, as you saw earlier, and a Greek divine figure on the backside and a Greek inscription on the backside. Now, we find around beginning of 2nd century BC, there are two rulers who issue coins in copper mixed with nickel, which have a lion on one side, and there is a Greek inscription, and then there's a female deity on the other side, an inscription written Brahmi. And if you read the inscription, it would give the name of the issuer, which is Agathocles on the first coin and Pantaleon on the second coin. Actually, these were the only two rulers who issued bilingual coins with Greek and Brahmi script. And incidentally, these were the coins that provided a major help to those scholars who were earlier trying to redecipher the Brahmi script in the British period, because they could read Greek, and so they made a guess that the same name should be in the other script also. So if it is alpha, the first letter of that Brahmi, other inscription should be a sounding, gamma, ga, theta, tha. That is how some of the individual letters were deciphered. So it were actually these coins that helped. But that is not what I'm trying to point out here. These coins actually directly show that the Bactrian Greeks were trying to make an attempt to gain acceptability by the local population, because their types were slightly alien types to the people. Did not, in Indian subcontinent, they did not use Greek. So they have used a local script, that is Brahmi script. Now this ruler is dated to about 190 to 180 BC, both of them in the same time frame. So beginning of the 2nd century. Then they're using, instead of the portrait of the Greek ruler, they're using motifs that are found on local coins, animal motifs. Maybe an Indian deity. Actually, the female deity is identified with Subhadra. So these kind of information, if you make them talk, when this indirectly shows, if you read the inscription, it does not give you that information, but this, and there is actually chain, because when you see another type, which is the
sorry, sir, I'm sorry to interrupt you in between. I was just wondering if you would like to take some questions, because we are running short of time. So
I would let me continue for 10 minutes, and then I would take questions.
Okay, actually, we are supposed to end this session by 1 o'clock, and then
okay, give me 5 minutes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. So this is another very famous type issued by Agathocles, and here they have used Indian deities. This is in silver. This is the famous type. So this is perhaps the first representation of Shankarshan Balram on one side and Vasudev Krishna on the other. So in addition to the local script, local language, that is Brahmi, Prakrit, they're using Indian deities to lure the Indian populace. Now, the deities are identified on the basis of their motifs, like one on the front side is holding a plowshare, that is why it's called Shankarshan, one who plows the land, and mace in his hand, and Shank and Chakra on the back side. Then you have another type. You see, when they issued coins in Bactria, they followed a weight standard, which was Attic weight standard. So the gram or drachm, which is the main unit, it weighed about 4.2 or 4.3 grams. Now there is a ruler called Apollodotus I, about 180 BCE. Now for India, he's trying to issue coins which could circulate along with the Mauryan silver punchmark coins. Now 4.2 was much heavier than the weight of the Mauryan punchmark coin. So he issues a round-shaped coin with Kharoshti inscription on the reverse and Greek inscription, with motifs of an elephant and bull, which are found on the silver punchmark coins. But this is actually half of the Attic weight gram coins. So this is only weighing 2.1 gram. Now this weight is very low as compared to the weight of the Mauryan silver punchmark coins, and probably people rejected it. So next innovation that he makes, he changes the shape to a rectangular shape, and above the elephant on the obverse, he introduces some of the symbols that are used on the Mauryan silver punchmark coins, like six-armed and sun symbol. But the weight remains at 2.1. Again, it did not find favor with the people. Then he increases the weight to about 2.4 grams. And this became the so-called Indo-Greek gram coins weight standard. And so if you see these coins or analyze these coins in particular historical context, then the meanings or the reasons become more clear. I would skip that. Now, or sometimes it provides important evidence for administrative purposes, like the joint rulership. So even in the Indo-Greek family, you find a coin in the name of Agathoclea, who was actually the queen regent to Strato I, who came after Menander. So we find a conjoined bust of Agathoclea with Strato on the obverse, and their names are in the Greek, and because when Menander passed away, perhaps Strato was a minor and she acted as queen regent to him. Then another instance is Hermias with Queen Calliope, and it is suggested that perhaps Hermias was not of royal birth, whereas Calliope was that of royal origin. So their conjoined busts are there. Then among the indigenous coins, we find of Satwahan ruler Satkarni first, and then with Queen Naganika, the name of queen is written on a central pillar, and atop which there is a horse, and perhaps this particular type was issued because they had performed a Ashwamedh sacrifice. Anyway, so we find the first evidence of joint rulership in ancient India on the coins of Satkarni and Queen Nagnika, which comes from Junnar in Maharashtra. Similarly, there is a well-known type of in gold of Chandragupta I and Queen Kumar Devi. And those familiar with the political history must be well aware that it is said that to begin with, the Guptas were small rulers, and Kumar Devi belonged to the politically powerful clan of the Lachavis. And by dint of their marriage, the political stock of the Guptas rose up. And we have this particular type where both are affected. The names of the other rulers, both of them are there. Similarly, sometimes it provides evidence of the succession. Like in the Western Chhatra family, we find that when a main ruler is ruling with the higher title of Mahachhatra under him, I mean, there may be several rulers ruling as Chhatrapa with the lower title of Chhatrapa. And we find that it was not primogeniture that eldest son would be succeeding his father, but instead his younger brother would succeed him to the higher role of Mahachhatra, though his sons may act with the lower titles of Chhatrapa. Then this is the most important feature of counter striking. Counter striking means that another set of die is stamped over an earlier coin. So there are two types: under type, which belong to the earlier ruler or earlier king issuing authority, and then the over type, where no information regarding the dates or succession orders are available. These small evidence have provided vital information for different periods, different, like in the Indo-Greeks, these counter-struck coins are there, which provide information about internal chronology. I mean, those who are overstriking a ruler's coin may not be earlier than the coins, the issuer of the original coin. He may either be a contemporary or a later successor of the issuer of the original coin. And when these coins are correlated, different evidence are correlated, then they provide vital help. Like, I would just use this particular type and then conclude. This is a coin of Satvahan ruler Pochiputra Satkarni, whose name is not found in the Puranic list, but he's a major ruler following the perhaps the earliest ruler of the Satvahan family, that is Satkarni first, whose coins are found in mostly in Nevasa Paitan region. And his coins are found overstruck on a particular type of coin, which are the so-called Ujjaini type, or which are an inscribed type, the date of which is not known, but which are found in very large numbers, particularly in Malwa and Saurashtra area of Gujarat. And the one that you see in the center is the type of the Pochiputra Satkarni. His name is written in Brahmi. And on the bottom, at the either side, are the types of the Malwa, Saurashtra, Ujjaini type coins that have been on top of, over which Pochiputra Satkarni overstruck his coins. So which means that they were close in terms of time. Now, here is another coin where the same uninscribed Ujjaini type is overstruck on a coin of Apollodotus II, the date of which is known to us. I mean, he is dated to about 80 to 60 BC, around that. So this means that this so-called Ujjaini type could not have been issued prior to the coin of Apollodotus II. And as a corollary, you can date the Kochiputra Satkarni to a particular date. Now, this is too well known. I mean, most of you are familiar with the fact that Gautamiputra Satkarni, the Satvahan ruler, overstruck coins of Nahapan, the Chahrat Chhatrap ruler. But Gautamiputra Satkarni probably had an elder brother called Shiva Satkarni. And his name is identified with the name Elder Saraganist, which is mentioned in Periplus. So Shiva Satkarni also overstruck Nahapan coins, and then his younger brother Gautamiputra Satkarni overstruck. And not only that, Nahapan also overstruck several types of Satvahan coins and then issued coins on the same typological continuation in those regions. So counter-strike is a major tool that we use for understanding these chronology of succession and such aspects of our history. Of course, there are other some other aspects like dye studies or metallurgical analysis that I wanted to speak on, but as we have come to the concluding time, so I have to stop here. Thank you very much for giving me a patient hearing. Now I'm ready to take your questions.
Thank you so
Good
much.
afternoon, sir. Good
Yes,
afternoon, sir.
we'll take just one, maybe couple
Hello.
of questions. Yes.
Hello, good
yes,
afternoon, sir.
Yes.
I am
Go
Dr.
on.
Charles from Pondicherry.
Okay.
Sir, I have a question to Amiteshwar, sir. Excellent presentation, sir. First of all, I must congratulate you. I have a question like, which coinage do you consider to be the oldest coinage
Oldest coinage
in
of
India?
Yeah.
In India, sir. In India.
Yeah,
Which
yeah.
coinage? Because after the excavations from Kiradi in Tamil Nadu, which do you consider? Have you come across anything in that?
No, I mean, the information that we have till now suggests that it's some of the local types of silver punchmark coins that are generally attributed to the Wajis or Magad. They were perhaps the oldest coins.
Okay.
How do you weightage a coin?
No,
Sir?
this Dr. Charles, I think you are heard.
Yes, yes.
Let others
Yeah.
speak as well.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take one question from Khalid.
Hello.
Yeah.
Sir, I'm Khalid from Manu only, the Department of History. I have a very simple question.
Yeah.
As far as inscriptions are, particularly inscriptions in Sanskrit are concerned, we have information as early as 2nd century AD onwards.
Hmm.
But when it comes to coins, when did we find coins written in Sanskrit or Sanskrit legends appear on coins in
It's
India?
around the same time. It's around the same time. Sporadically, on some coins, second, first century BC. Of course, we do not know the exact date. Like on Kuninda coins, we have sometimes Sanskritized inscriptions. Sometimes it is a mix of both. So, but on a regular basis, it is only from the time of Guptas, that is 4th century onwards, that the language of the inscription is. Otherwise, it is Prakrit, which is the language spoken by the common.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we'll take one question from Amol Patil before I go to Mehboob Pasha. Amol Patil, yes. Amol Patil, can you hear me? All right. Pasha sir, you go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you very much for a very nice presentation, sir. Sir, I have a query. When did women begin to figure on coins? And do we have any evidence of common women figuring on coins other than royal women?
Women, as far as issuing authorities are concerned, are those which I showed you. That is, in 1st century BC, that is on the indigenous points of Satkarni and Agnika, or slightly earlier in the form of Indo-Greek coins, Agatolia and Plato. But in the form of female deities, sometimes maybe around the same time, begin to find on the backside of the coin. But I don't think we have instances of common people, common female thing on coins. That way, common men, because it's a small representation. So you do not typically, even a god is identified with the help of, or these divine figures are identified with the help of their attributes only. Otherwise, it's a common representation of a male figure. Common female figure, I don't think we have any representation.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, may I request Mehboob Pasha sir to mute yourself, please? There is a noise coming back from your end. We'll take one last question from Sharanappa, and I should stop here after that. Sharanappa, yes.
Sir, sir, I am Sharanappa from Karnataka, GFGC Government. My question is, I want to know, sir, who was the first to introduce the gold coin in our India, sir?
Yeah, that I mentioned.
Gold
The Kushans were the first to issue gold coins. Otherwise, Menander, there is a particular type attributed to Menander.
Sir, I was read in Vedic text. Vedic text. Niska is the gold coin is there, and
well, you see, it is mentioned that Nesh, Satman, etc. It is generally accepted that these are references to metallic money, but which were not as yet coins. Probably these were round pieces of gold. References suggest that they were offered to the Brahmanas performing these sacrifices. So they may have been metal pieces of definite weight, but they did not have any symbols or anything written on them, which would suggest that they were as yet coins. But not coins, they were metallic money, and subsequently also in articles you will find, or newspapers you will find that gold pieces have been found that are identified as Vedic references to Nishk and other. No, but it's not certain. It's not certain.
Thank you so much. I'm
Thank you.
sure there are many more questions, but unfortunately, because of the shortage of time, we can't address. And I must say that the lecture was so interesting, and because of which it has generated a lot of curiosity among all of us. But Dr. Jha, I must thank you for joining us today and talking to us about the history of Indian coinage, its importance as a source of history, and the technique to read and make them talk. Thank you so much. I can see Dr. Danish Moeen sir also has joined. But sir, I think we are running short of time. It's already 1:17. So we'll see you, all the participants, at 2 o'clock sharp. Thank you, Dr. Amiteshwar Jha sir. Thank you, Dr. Danish Moeen. And
Thank you, Amiteshwar.
all the participants.
Thank you.
Thank you, Amiteshwar. Thank you very
Thank you
much.
so much. See you at 2 o'clock sharp.
Okay.